Hello, folks, and welcome back to the Bug Bash. We are excited to have you join us for another episode of this live series where we tackle real world challenges in test automation by talking to folks in the industry who live and breathe this stuff every single day. I'm your host, Jenna Beckett, and it is great to be back here chatting with you all. Whether you are joining us live or you're catching the replay, you're in the right place today if you are looking for inspiration for your testing philosophy, some career journey tips, and maybe some insights into the future of test automation. We have a packed agenda today, so we are just going to dive right into content. And I am very excited to have Ryan Emberling, Cypress Ambassador, here with me today. So, Ryan, if you wouldn't mind coming on camera, giving everybody a quick intro, get to know you a little better, that'd be great.
Website for playing a battle card game called Cuddle, which is not a game that I invented. It's actually older than I am. But I did make a site where people can play it online for free, and it's an open source project. Yes, thank you very much for the plug.
Shameless plug. We love those here.
Yes, me too. So we use Cypress heavily at assessments, and I also use it for Cuddle thoroughly as well, in some ways that are interrelated, in some ways that are different from each other, as they're different use cases, but both web applications. I've been doing web development in general for somewhere around 10 years, give or take, and I've been at Systems for about 6. And I'm really privileged to get to participate in both of those spheres. I love my job. I work with some incredible people at Assessments, making cool stuff, doing our best to help students learn and teachers better serve their students, and to make teachers' lives easier, which we love to do. And on Cuddle as well, I met some really incredible people, both contributing to the project directly and collaborating with some brilliant folks who are a whole lot of fun, and also playing the game, which, as you might imagine, I quite enjoy as I bothered undertaking this kind of crazy project. So, I have been working heavily with Cypress for about 5 years now, and I find it so useful for development and for testing. I mean, I'm an advocate of test-driven development. I don't think it's something to be dogmatic about. And it's not always going to sort of suit every workflow or project, but where it's possible, I think there's a big opportunity for writing tests to save time in the development process, especially if you do some upfront investment in setting things up to make that possible. And so I personally benefit from it quite a bit. I'm really grateful to the whole Cypress organization and team. I think you've got some pretty cool stuff, and I'm happy to be able to use it.
That's awesome. Thank you, Ryan. Now, that was an amazing intro. Thank you for letting us get to know you a little bit. And before we dive into some questions that I have planned for Ryan to answer and kind of share some insights on, I do want to go back to our Bug Bash swag winner. And I'm doing this a little out of order today because it is kind of funny. Before we reached out to Ryan and had him on as the speaker and set, we had already drawn the winner for the next swag winner. So congratulations, Ryan, on your Bug Bash swag. So we'll get that in the mail to you. You could win a swag package just like Ryan and have the same level of excitement. All you got to do is join a live session like this, or you can drop a future topic suggestion in the community discussion thread for us. So now that we have that little irony out of the way, let's move into talking about a couple questions. So Ryan, I'm going to start off with your career path. And it's kind of atypical for folks who describe themselves as passionate about test automation. So can you tell us a little bit about your career journey and how your passion for quality software developed over that time?
Yeah. So for me, my experience with testing was really rooted foundationally in my interest in software engineering. And so I actually I studied some computer science in college, but only about 3 courses, and I really enjoyed them, but they all felt very abstract and sort of removed from basically being able to make something that I would really want to use, if that makes sense. Um, so it was a lot of like text processing and then outputting text in the terminal kind of stuff. And I enjoyed the like challenge of it, but I wasn't really creating things concretely that I was excited about. And then a dear friend of mine, shortly after college, taught me the basics of web development, like HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. When I went to visit him for like a weekend in New York City. His name's Scotty Eckenthal. He's like an incredible developer and just a gem of a human. And I was like hooked immediately. Suddenly it was like concrete in a way that sort of gelled with my interests, I guess. And so I immediately made perhaps like the most hideous representation of tic-tac-toe that's ever been created, with like a very striking contrast of like bright blue, magenta, and yellow blobs all over the place. But I had a blast creating it in CodePen, which, for those of you unaware, is like a great little playground to just like quickly prototype small little web dev stuff. And then I followed that up with making tic tac toe in like 3D, essentially, or at least like kind of analogously how I would do it on paper. And regular tic tac toe took me about a week. Then 3D tic tac toe took me about a month, still in CodePen. And then I was like, great, time for something new. I'm bored of tic tac toe, so it's not going to be that anymore. And it felt really silly to be making like, sorry?
I said, and so then cuddle cards came about, right?
Yes, exactly. Like I didn't know what a web server was at that time, but I did know that it felt silly to make a website where 2 people could like sit at the same computer and play a game that like you could just play with a piece of paper or a deck of cards for that matter. So I was like, I want to make something you could play over the internet, and there's nowhere that like I could play Cuddle online. So I'd like to be able to do that. So why not? How hard could that be? Turns out that was harder than 3D tic tac toe in CodePen. So if the previous 2 projects took me like a half or so, the first version of Cuddle.cards that you play online took about like 2.5 years, I think. But that was really going from a place of just knowing almost nothing about web development. Barely knew what a web server was. I'd taken like a remedial database course, but I just was fumbling my way through it. But learning a whole lot really fast. And I had a great time working on it. I really enjoyed me. And eventually, with some help from a whole lot of people, I was able to cobble together the very first alpha version of Cuddle.cards. And at that time, like my workflow was whenever I wanted to build a feature or like fix something that was wrong with the site, because there's just so many different interactions that can happen in the game. I would open 2 browser tabs and I would sign up as an account in each of them, and then I would start working on like I would try to set up the situation. I'd like create a game, and then I would join it in both browsers, and I would like ready up, and then the game starts, and that's great. Now I'm going to start drawing cards. Like there was a while where there's a bug where jacks are a card that you play on top of another person's card, and it steals it, right? Like you could jack their stuff, as it were. And I built them wrong, basically, so that when you would destroy the jack, like they would, or place another one on top, it just didn't work, and the jack would disappear, essentially. And so I kept having to just like draw and draw cards to like get to a situation where like somebody had a jack and then the other person has to play it. And I was easily spending like 2 to 5 or more minutes on just setting up a situation that I was trying to develop for. And so later, when I started, I went to grad school at Carnegie Mellon in educational technology and applied learning science. And then I started working at Assistments and learning more about how things are done in sort of a professional environment. And by that time, I'd had kind of an inkling about testing as a useful thing, but I hadn't really encountered it in an end-to-end sense or done any like front-end centered testing. I was just starting to learn about that on one of the first major projects that I started on at Assistments, which is called eTrials. And that's basically a platform for conducting learning science experiments where researchers sort of define some parameters around um, differentiated experiences for students in order to study what kinds of interventions are the most effective for helping students learn, like different kinds of hints, things along those lines. And a friend that I was working on the project with, a colleague, um, recommended checking out Cypress as an option for testing, and we gave it a shot. And immediately I was like, man, that's a lot better than what I've been doing for a long time. And so we started using Cypress as Assistant, and we still use it very heavily for our end-to-end testing and our integration testing front end. And later, I started bringing this to Cuddle when another friend sort of asked if I wanted to take a crack at making a new Cuddle UI that was less horrible than the original version. Because the first one really harkened back to my bright magenta and hideous tic-tac-toe implementation. And so by the time we really like set down to start building that, I was very adamant that like we are going to be testing this from the beginning. And so we invested a significant amount of upfront effort in basically creating Cypress commands for automating some of the most foundational tasks, specifically like programmatically getting into a game as something that just I described earlier, like you have to sign up as two accounts and create a game and join it as both players and both ready up. So one command to just do that in moments, basically, compared to like a minute or so, and then another command to put a game into a specific situation, which, oh my gosh, that has saved me so much time. I mean, we once found a bug in Cuddle that like took the situation was basically there's this card called a 7, and if you play its special effect, then you flip the top 2 cards of the deck and then can pick one to play. And there's a situation where if both of those cards are Jack is the only card that you're not able to play in all situations. And so if that was the case, sometimes you'd have to throw one away. And there was a bug at one point that if there's only one card left in, and that was a Jack, then the game just broke because the only thing you were allowed to do was play a Jack, and you couldn't actually do it. And so it's like this very specific situation of there's one card left in the deck and it's a Jack, and somebody plays a 7 and that Jack can't be played. It's very difficult to get into, but when you did, it's like, oh, you can't do anything. The game is complete. And getting into that situation without proper testing software would be such a nightmare. So it was really convenient to be able to sort of forcibly create that situation programmatically in a matter of like less time writing the code than it would have previously taken me to just like get into it once. And now I've got a repeatable test that I can check every time and check for regressions forevermore.
I like how you
So
mentioned that, along your journey, there were a couple of key people who kind of introduced you to concepts, who partnered with you, shared knowledge, as you were kind of progressing and learning about test automation and web development. And I think you actually even shared that recently in our blog post, featuring you as a mentor. You shared some of your major motivators is sharing knowledge and helping others learn. So I'd be really interested to hear like how those motivators have helped you to grow into the leadership role that you're in right now.
sure, yeah. I mean, I have always loved learning and teaching both. I mean, as somebody who likes to learn, I get a lot of joy out of that, and I also really like to share the things that I like with the people that I like, and so I love when I can help somebody else learn. I mean, somebody who wants to learn something and is invested, empowering them to do so is just like such a joy to have and to be able to do. And I actually, before I was working at Systems, I went to grad school. I was working as a tutor, largely in math, but also sort of helping students with cross-functional educational skills around things like depth of processing and executive function and working memory. And so that helped kind of feed my interest in education and educational technology as a field to apply myself. And now that I've learned a lot about software engineering and QA, it's something that I really like to share about because it can really help a whole lot. Like I have skin in the game and some really tangible uh, examples of like mistakes that I've made and things that I've learned that have helped me and that I think can help other people quite a bit as well. Because you can save so much time by automating things with Cypress and also increase the confidence in the quality of what you build. And I've tried to use Cuddle.cards as like a project to help facilitate learning really from the outset. Like initially it was the first web development project that I undertook for my own benefit. And at that time I learned an enormous amount by working, including learning about how much you can learn by just building something that you're passionate about. And so as I sort of transitioned my own role at Assistments from an individual contributor function to a more sort of leadership and managerial one, I similarly have tried to align the work that I do on Cuddle in ways that like help me to sort of stretch and grow in the ways that I'm aspiring to, which includes a lot of like mentorship and trying to help other people learn. That's something that I care deeply about and want to support at work. And so that's something I really try to bring to Cuddle. And in part, that is a matter of sort of working with people to understand their interests and as much as possible trying to align the things that they take on with the things that they're trying to grow and improve at so that they can grow in a direction that strategically aligns with what the organization is trying to achieve. And so when somebody comes to contribute to Cuddle as an open source project, if they're interested, I'm very happy to talk to them about experience and their interests and whether they're particularly invested in, say, like improving the developer experience and cleaning code or optimizing performance, or if they have a particular bent towards user experience or communication or backend architecture or wherever they're at, there's generally something that you can work on that's like exciting and cool within, I think, really almost any project that's sort of robust enough that it's got enough things going on that you find something cool to work on. And so as much as possible, I try to help people to find things to work on that are motivating to them and help them to add value to something concrete in a way that allows them to grow their own skills in ways that sort of harken back to ways that I've been able to grow my own project.
This actually makes me think of your one of your favorite quotes that you've mentioned in
Mm-hmm.
that blog post, which was the wisdom to know the difference. And I asked this in conjunction with kind of your test philosophy of
Mm-hmm.
treat your test as sacred. So these two kind of like quotes or motivators, how do they affect the test philosophy you all use at Assessments and how you
Mm-hmm.
approach, writing tests, maintaining them? I'd love to dig into that with you.
Yeah. So, with respect to uh, the wisdom to know the difference, I guess the that's taken from the Serenity Prayer, which I consider to be one of the wisest pieces of advice I've ever heard personally. And we could set aside the theology of the beginning of that statement, but I think that seeking the courage to change the things we can, the serenity to accept the things we cannot change, the wisdom to know the difference is an invaluable exercise in every, really, like identifying the sphere of our own control and the things that are beyond the sphere of our own control is a good way to ground yourself and focus on what you can do, and to, as much as possible, avoid agonizing. And with respect to testing, I think that manifests in a number of ways. One of them is sort of understanding the limitations of your architecture, essentially, and thinking about them with respect to their flexibility. Like, what are the constraints that you are faced with? What does that mean about what you can test now, what you can't test, and what might it take to adjust those constraints, and would that be a worthwhile exercise? So, for example, at Assistments, we currently have a, let's see. So our product is highly integrated with learning management systems. And the sort of fundamental loop involves teachers creating assessments that get sent to their learning management system, Google Classroom or Canvas. And then the students see those assignments created in their instance of the LMS, and then they can go into and complete the work and get immediate feedback and that sort of thing. And this tight coupling of our product really requiring the LMS to function in order to properly work imposes some pretty significant constraints on testing that make it complicated, because we can't fully test end to end in a way that stubs or mocks the LMS integration, because that happens server side. And so there are some features like the creation of an assignment, which is fairly integral to our platform, which we kind of need to accept and work around the constraint that like that feature only adequately functions when our system communicates with the LMS, which constrains our testing architecture. So we can, in the front end, have have sort of integration tests which intercept all of the requests to the back end and fully mock them and control them in either test code or in sort of a generalized mocking library, including the creation of an assignment. But for the purpose of like end-to-end fidelity, confirming that our product like really works and we're fully confident in the core functionality, we have to be able to have our backend talk to the LMS, which requires being authenticated with the LMS in a way that poses some serious challenges for testing, essentially. And so needing to accept those challenges as surmountable problems to focus on, and kind of accept some of the drawbacks with respect to testing architecture that they impose, has positioned us to set up some fairly robust commands for managing these kinds of like the authentication essentially in a fully environment, and architecting our testing that allows us to execute tests in a fully deployed environment that has all of the software interconnected and really confirmed that everything that we cover via the end-to-end really works 100% with the full stack.
And how does that go into treating your test as sacred? What does that mean at Assessments?
So I consider this largely a matter of cultural practice and sort of the responsiveness to flake. I basically, we have there's sort of a couple pieces. So one of the constraints of our architecture as it currently stands with respect to testing is that we have three environments: dev, test, and prod. And there's only one live deployment of the entire stack in each. So we're not spinning up a complete stack like per feature branch, for example, in like an ephemeral way for testing. And so that means that our end-to-end tests only run on the deployed instances. And so we'll basically execute our end-to-end tests as a part of the deployment process, which we'll do to dev either on demand or at minimum once a day. And that has this inherent nuisance of kind of missing when a bug may have already gone in to dev in a way that only appears end to end. And it puts us in a position, if that happens, and we catch a deployment in dev, of now having a bug ticket that we need to address, essentially. And this sort of opens the question of like the timeline of when you do so. And our approach is generally to do it as expediently as possible, which one would hope, but also even to, in a pinch, skip the failing test and flag that with the ticket to fix it, so that we avoid a situation where when we deploy to dev every day, it's like, well, that bug is still unfixed, and so we should just expect that there's going to be a test failure every day. That, because once you're in the habit of sort of expecting tests to fail, it reduces the visibility of like a real problem. Is one you can have something sneak in where you're like, yeah, I've just been expecting that it's going to fail until that bug ticket I see fixed is in, but it's like, oh wait, actually something. And for that reason, in a pinch, if there's a bug that's really going to be slipped into dev, we found it preferable so far to document the need to sort of re-enable the correct test as a part of the completion of the bug fix ticket, and in the meantime to skip it, so that even though we're reducing our coverage when we do so, in the meantime, we've got it documented to improve the coverage as a fix, and we're not establishing this habit of like tuning out failure signals. Oh, that's just the expected.
I mean, and that goes back to like, if you don't name it, you can't address it. So like, and doing that sooner, the better, and is going to keep everyone accountable. So I really appreciate your insights on the testing philosophy and your career journey. And I would be remiss if I let us get to the end of this session without asking you about, I feel like the topic that most people are talking about right now in test automation, which is AI. In fact, Cypress just recently announced Sci.prompt, speaking of shameless plugs. So I want to hear what your thoughts are on AI in test automation and testing in general, and like what parts you think really need to remain human driven.
So it's something that I'll need deeper experience with to have a progressively more confident answer. But my inclination, in the spirit of reduction of flake, is, to me, it's preferable to have human reviewed test code at some point. And so with respect to Sci.prompt, I'm really intrigued by the interpretability of it. I think it may open some doors, for example, for like product people or like folks who are not comfortable writing automated test code fully to more naturally specify the steps semantically within the application. And I'm drawn to the prospect of using that in order to then generate and sort of more directly consume the actual test code that's generated by that process, in the spirit of largely determinacy, essentially, or being deterministic, because I'm wary of flake, and so I'd like to be able to see that the exact same input is sort of rendering the same output every time, which very well might be the case already. Shall I say, like a prompt-based test, but I'm particularly intrigued by the prospect of using LLMs to like generate test code and then running that same test code until there's a need to make a change based on the application behavior.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Ryan. We are getting towards the end of our Bug Bash session, so I did want to jump over to chat and see if we had any folks in the audience that had questions for Ryan. I'm going to give them a couple of minutes to maybe type out their question, Ryan, but in the meantime, I have a question of my own. And I'd love to hear about, what is your biggest tip for using the Cypress framework? Maybe it's like, you need to know this key piece of information, or don't forget about this command, or something along those lines. What would be your big tip?
Let's see. Um, there's so many good things about it. I mean, so one one overarching thing that I would recommend is in general, especially if you're starting out a project, it's really powerful to start setting up your testing framework alongside with your code base as early as possible. Not to say it's a lost cause if that you're starting out testing something that's already pretty well established, but that if you take the attitude of like how will I test this as a part of the actual development process, it invites this opportunity to include selectors, for example, and just make it easier to execute your tests as a part of your workflow in an ongoing capacity. And that makes things easier and more robust in the fullness of time. With respect to like a specific sort of syntactical Cypress trick, one thing that I quite like that I think is actually undocumented, but a really nifty feature in it, is if you have a well, if you have an assertion using expect, like expect my variable to equal some other variable, you can give as a second argument to like the .eq function of like what you expect it to equal a string, which is the message for that assertion to help you understand it failed. And the thing that I think is especially nifty is that if your string argument, which is sort of your explanation, has a comma in it, then in the case where the assertion passes, everything up until the comma will print. And in the case where it fails, the whole string will print. So if you type something along the lines like expect my val dot to equal true, you can say expected my true, but it was. And this, is a little bit contrived, so it might not be as clear or specific an example. But in Cuddle, we've got some complicated assertions, for example, that are checking like lists of cards, and all of them are exactly what expected. And so the ability when everything's green and good to just see the sort of short version of like, oh, this is I expected it to be true and it was great, great, great. But then to have this like fuller message in the case where there was something that was wrong and get a little detail in a way that is like nicely filtered out when things are is I think a pretty little syntactical maneuver.
I love that. I did not know this. I have not tried this before, so I'm definitely going to be giving it a shot from now on out. I don't see any questions in chat, so I think we are going to go ahead and start wrapping up on our session. Ryan, thank you again. Your insights have been really great. I really appreciate talking about your testing philosophy and the unique journey that you took to get to where you are today. We thank you for being a part of the Cypress Ambassador Program and the Cypress community in general. So we are going to go ahead and thank everyone for joining us. We appreciate your time in this session. We will be coming back to you all, not next week, but the week after, always on Tuesday. We'll be back to an AM time slot to catch some other time zones live. But thank you, everyone. We appreciate it, and happy testing. See ya.